Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I should be live. Let's see if we are. YouTube is kind of going wrong in the background for me for some reason. So I guess I'll find out shortly. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, seems to be. Hello, folks. I know I haven't used this channel in an awfully long time, but I'm trying to get it remonetized. And one thing that YouTube, I've got past a bunch of hurdles with it. A lying bill that passed yesterday, I think it was, in Parliament, because this is a monumental shift in the way that we think about human life. And we have, as the Canadians have shown us, examples of how this can be done and not good. Now, I've got a bit of a sore throat, so I'll be coughing a lot through this. Sorry. It has become winter, and I've instantly picked up something evil. So I've got to say I am quite concerned about this. I'm not sure exactly how I feel about it, right? So on the first part is I don't hate the idea, right? Because during COVID, both of my grandmothers died, and my grandfathers had both died years before. And they were both old. They were both, near either like 87, 88, and 91. So they'd had a good long life, both of them. Is the audio not good? The audio should be fine. It says it's coming through the normal audio on mine. Anyway, so they both had a good long life. And one of them died. I don't really know what she died of. I think she's depression, something like that, because of the lockdowns. But the other one died of cancer, and obviously, horrific terminal cancer. I can't do anything if it's cutting out. I mean, YouTube seems to be just buggered on the back end, to be honest. I had to load it up to get the chat up. So I'm afraid if the audio is buggered, I don't know what I can do. Okay, well, I'm glad it's fine for some people. If it's cutting out for you, then, I don't know, refresh it maybe. Anyway, so it was difficult to go and see her, of course. And the only time I was able to see her before she died, and it was only about a week or so before she died, she was just basically a skeleton. And she was completely off of her mind on drugs. And she was just laying just on the bed like this, with a kind of pain, a rattle of pain just coming out of her. She was completely unconscious the entire time I was there. And she just looked like she was just suffering, incredible amounts of suffering. And I didn't like the fact that she had to go through it, obviously. And so, on one hand, there is actually quite a strong argument for if someone is in a condition like that, then actually the humane thing to do would be assisted dying. On the other hand, you have Canada. And Canada is mental. Canada has their MAID program, which is medically assisted, I don't know, whatever it stands for. And so anyway, they are mental. And one study has found that 1 in 10 deaths in Canada is by the state killing them. And it's worrying because it's kind of being made into a kind of normal thing. Oh yeah, well, not happy with how your life is, maybe you should kill yourself. And I've heard some disgusting stories. The one that sticks out in my mind was, I think it was a woman who was waiting for a stair lift to be put into her house because she was disabled, and she was harassing the government. Look, you said you were going to install a stair lift in my house so I can get to the top of my house. And they were like, yeah, well, why didn't you just kill yourself? And it's like, no, that's awful. That's actually awful. That's absolutely... And people with depression are recommended this. And it's hard not to think that because Canada has their equivalent of an NHS, the bureaucrats are actually favouring medically assisted dying because this eases the burden on the healthcare system. And so people are being encouraged to kill themselves rather than being a burden on others or on the system itself, making the system more important than the people it is supposed to help. And I have to say, it's rather ironic that the health system is one of the leading causes of death on purpose in Canada. I mean, you could go back 400 years, right, and go to a hospital, and the hospital is a grim place to go, because in the modern era, we think of hospitals as places where a person convalesces. You go there for surgery, for treatment, and you go there to get better. And then once you're better, unless, there's something terribly wrong, you leave. Well, not 400 years ago. 400 years ago, a hospital was where you went to die. And that's kind of what we're bringing back now. And I have to say, I don't like it. I think it's quite a bad thing. And what's interesting is that California and Canada both have medically assisted dying, right? Now, California has twice the population of Canada, and it's incredibly left-wing, incredibly liberal. And so to compare the two is a really fair comparison. And so it's very interesting how 853 Californians were euthanized by the state in 2022, compared with 13,000 Canadians. Now, a cynical person might say, well, maybe Canada is actually doing this the way it ought to be done. People with extreme medical conditions that are terminal, that are incredibly painful, that leave them essentially nonsensical, with zero quality of life, just in complete and unremitting pain until they die, are choosing this, which accounts for the low number per year. And in Canada, they're using it as an excuse to essentially bump people off. And until proven otherwise, I think that's the assumption I'm going to make on that, because why would I not think that? What reason would I have? Why would it be more than 10 times more people in Canada are killed by the state than California? Like, it is mental. No, the population is not. California's got about 64 million people. Canada's got about 32 million people. So it's not 1-to-1 population. Near edge, it's 2-to-1. And even if it was 1-to-1, that would still make it insanely more dangerous under the Canadian state. It's crazy, and I really think it's something we should be very aware of going into the conversation. So anyway, let's have a quick look at how the MPs voted. Now, what was interesting about this is that this was not done along clear party lines. You, in fact, had a lot of Labour MPs who were against this, and you had a significant number of Liberal Democrats and a significant number of Conservatives for it. And so it was, it's mostly Labour and mostly Conservative. Well, no, it's actually mostly Labour on the other side as well, really, because the Labour Party has so many MPs compared to the Conservatives. But it is a lot. And it's a very strange split. And so I thought we'd go through some of them and look at some of the reasoning people are giving at some point. So one of the interesting ones for me is Diane Abbott, who you might be well aware of as being the the thought leader of Hackney North and Stoke Newington. She put both of her left feet forward and voted against, which is interesting, because she's an incredibly left-wing person. So you might think that the liberal argument that one wants to be able to choose how they die and to avoid suffering. So it's classically liberal. This very, very strong liberal argument is, I ought to be able to choose how I die. This is my body, my choice. And minimizing suffering is always a good thing. Therefore, you would think lots of people who are on the left, the people who are intransigent liberals or communists, would agree with that, because these are two principles that both liberals and communists strongly hold. And yet Diane Abbott voted against, and she's pretty much as left-wing as they come, which is very interesting. There were lots of Muslim MPs who voted against, and I'm guessing they voted for religious reasons. I don't know if Diane Abbott's Christian or not. I would have assumed she was an atheist, but I'm certain she's not a Muslim. And so it very, very interesting. And on the other side, you've got Lee Anderson from Ashfield who voted for. Now, the case for, as I've already laid out, is compelling if it were to be done with very strict controls. Right? The government would have to be very much against this. However, I forgot to get something up. Let me grab something. Right. However, this is clearly already not the case. This is an assisted dying advert that was put, and a series of adverts that were put on the London Underground. Like, weird, creepy adverts making it look as if it's a desirable thing to do. Now that is mental. That is absolutely mental. And this comes from the most liberal, most left-wing position of this is liberatory. And the Netherlands does this as well and has done it for people with just depression. I'm feeling depressed. Okay, well, we'll just euthanize you then. And they do little movies for it, make it look sexy, make it look appealing. And it's like, no, that's... And, of course, you'll notice there's a very interesting ethnic representation in these adverts, right? And so this is mental. This is just highly inappropriate. And frankly, I think you could go as far as say this is openly evil. The state shouldn't be allowing people to propagandize the citizenry to kill themselves. I don't think that's a very controversial statement. I think that's perfectly normal. This is sick. This is genuinely sick. As you're pointing out, Darth, in the comments, this is absolutely mental. And so, like I said, there is a case for assisted dying, but the context of it very much matters, as Canada has shown us. I don't want 1 in 10 Britons to be murdered by the state. 1 in 10 deaths to be by the state. If it's something along the lines of how California is handling, which is a much smaller number, okay, I can accept that, because that would imply that this is being done responsibly and it's being treated as a necessary evil rather than a joyous liberation, because it's definitely not a joyous liberation to have the state euthanize you. But anyway, so as you can see, Lee Anderson of Reform voted for. And so the extreme left-winger, like Diane Abbott, has voted against, and the person who is apparently far right has voted for it. Very interesting, because this starts blurring a bunch of strange lines. And of course, you've got Lib Dems who are against, Gideon Amos, maybe he's particularly religious, I don't know, or Steph Aquaron, who is for. So, okay, there is not an easy ideological line that the parties can fall behind on this. And I think Keir Starmer actually did say he's not going to enforce the whip on this and make his MPs vote in a particular direction, so they're free to follow their consciences. Which, again, it's just very interesting. Kemi Badenoch voted against, which is the Conservative line, I think. But then that makes it so strange that, you know, dozens of Conservatives voted for. Maybe they're the Lib Dem wing of the Conservative Party. Who else is there? There's more. So we've got, again, lots of Labour for and against. You just can't tell. Like, and again, there are people with very English names. I don't know a lot of these MPs. There are 650 MPs, and a lot of them are quite, you know, small time. But again, it's just, you know, for against. It's quite an even split, frankly. Let's keep going. Richard Bergen. He's an incredibly left-wing person. Insane Corbynista. He's against. Okay, why? That's very strange, isn't it? Like, you'd think the extremely left-wing people, Dawn Butler. Again, incredibly left-wing. Against. Sorry about the coughing. It's just killing me. I'm going to get euthanized. I've got a sore throat. Conservatives, 4. Okay. Like Sarah Champion of Rotherham, 4. Okay. James Cleverly, against. Okay. Like, again, it's hard to know why. And I do think it is the Conservative position saying no to increasing, and this is left-wing ideological progress, right? This is what they think progress entails. So Conservatives really ought to vote against it on that basis. But like I said, there is a strong argument for it, and if it were to be handled responsibly, it would be fine. But as I've said, I don't think it's going to be. Let's see. Yvette Cooper, 4. Well, she's a very left-wing person. Again, who can tell? I don't know what the rationale for each one is. Jeremy Corbyn, formerly Labour Party leader and communist, against. That's weird. I would have expected him 4. I mean, I would have thought he would have taken the most left-wing position, which is I should be able to end my life. Stella Creasy, insane feminist, 4. The political difference between Jeremy Corbyn and Stella Creasy is utterly marginal, right? You wouldn't be able to get a credit card between their politics, and yet, for and against. What explains this? I'm not saying I even know, to be honest. And it's interesting how this has been sprung on everyone. There wasn't like a large media discussion before it. There wasn't like a large public debate. And we didn't get the time to sort of sink into ideological camps over it. And so it's hard to know what the impetus for all of this was. And there's an interesting, like, Scunthorpe and Torbay, both 4. Yeovil, 4. West Lancashire, against. Again, the regions don't make any sense either. There's no easy and evident pattern to pull out of it, as far as I can tell. Welsh MP, against. Like, okay, why? Telford, 4. Pontypridd, 4. Okay, why? It's, again, there's no rhyme or reason, but there are a lot of Davies. Ed Davey, Lib Dem leader, against. Again, why? It's a perfectly liberal perspective to say that a person who is suffering should be able to choose to end their own life. That's very liberal. Very utilitarian. What's the argument? But I will look him up in a minute. Who else have we got? A bunch of people that I just have never heard of, just no-name MPs. Annalise Dodds, again, against. Okay, interesting. Very interesting. Rosie Duffield, against. Okay. Again, things that you just wouldn't necessarily expect. Hamish Falconer for Lincoln, 4, Labour. Nigel Farage, against. Okay. Tim Farron, the former leader of the Liberal Democrats, against. Okay. I assume on this one, Tim Farron is a Christian, and he got in a lot of trouble recently for saying, he doesn't really support gay marriage because it's not biblical. And so I'm assuming he's voting with his Christian faith here. Who else have we got? Mark Francois, ardent Brexiteer, against. Okay. An understandably conservative position. God, we do have so many goddamn MPs. Do we need this many MPs? I have to question the efficiency of the state. Emma Hardy voted for and against? What? I guess that's an error by The Guardian there. That can't be 2 Emma Hardys occupying the same seat. Maybe she's got schizophrenia or something. Lindsay Hoyle didn't vote. Right, okay. Lots of Husseins are against. Fair enough. Robert Jenrick, against. And Lib Dem 4. Why? What is the argument? What is the reason? But we'll get into it in a second. I just want to go through and see if there are any other interesting takes. David Lammy, against. Again, like, David Lammy, you would think in previous eras you would call him an incredibly left-wing person, and yet here he is. Kim Leadbeater for Labour, 4. Okay. Clive Lewis, 4. So that Clive Lewis, again, the ones that I'm picking out are just incredibly left-wing when we're talking about the Labour Party. And so Clive Lewis and Jeremy Corbyn, they're just the same. Their politics is just a Venn diagram of the same issues for the same reasons, because they're both communists, and yet Corbyn, no, Clive Lewis, 4. What explains this? Rebecca Long Bailey. Again, you couldn't find anyone more left-wing than these people, and she's against. Why? Rupert Lowe, for Reform. Now, Rupert Lowe is an incredibly conservative man, and he's been saying all of the right conservative things. He's 4. So Nigel Farage is against. Lee Anderson and Rupert Lowe, who are markedly more conservative than Farage, are both 4. Okay, that's just... What is happening here? What is the rationale for this? Someone explain this to me, because I have no idea why this is happening. Like, it's not even that they don't agree, but these are opposite positions, right? There's one thing having, small doctrinal differences on the end consequence of policy, but this is an upriver moral question that they're completely at odds on. So I want to know what the reason is. And if anyone's got any theses on this, let me know. Because honestly, I am baffled by how this is splitting. What was got? Ed Miliband, 4. Okay, yeah. I mean, Ed Miliband's not that left-wing. He's quite left-wing. Esther McVeigh from the Conservatives, against. Okay, interesting. Again, what's the reasoning? It's very, very bizarre. Who else have we got? Some people didn't vote, so I guess either they abstained on purpose or they just couldn't get there for whatever reason. Priti Patel, against. Okay, fairly stock Conservative position. It's fine. Jess Phillips, 4. Again, very left-wing. Couldn't get much more left-wing than Jess Phillips. I'd socialise all of England if I could, Jess Phillips. So you can't really get much more left-wing. She went for it, but Jeremy Corbyn, I mean, she's not a friend of Jeremy Corbyn. She's had differences, but again, not politically, seems to be personally. So what's the distinction? Who else have we got? Rachel Reeves, 4. Huh, okay. Like, I actually don't know. I assumed all of the left would be 4 and all of the right would be against, but that's just not how this has fallen. Naz Shah, against. The one who retweeted that the Owen Jones parody that the English girls who have been raped by the grooming gang need to shut up for the sake of diversity. But I don't want people being killed by the state. That's terrible. The assisted... Okay, all right. Okay, I assume it's because she's Islamic and that is part of the Muslim faith. But I just don't know. Who else? I'm not recognising any of these other ones. Oh, Nadia Whitten, 4. Right, okay, there we go. She's incredibly left-wing. She's 4. Where's Tice? Tice voted 4. Okay. Emily Thornberry voted 4. I mean, Emily Thornberry, Islington South. She's incredibly left-wing. Like any other... Well, it's not this is individual thought. This is unusual, right? Especially when we get into how this has happened. So I want to thank Morgoth for the thumbnail, because I'm genuinely concerned, as I think Morgoth is, that this is just going to end up as suicide pods, and it's going to normalise the idea that if your life gets a bit difficult, well, like in the Netherlands, you should just euthanize yourself. Wouldn't it just be easier to die? Which I think is a deeply unhealthy and evil thing for our civilization to normalise. I don't think it's a good idea. I think Ed Dutton made a good point here. Remember university tuition fees. Let me just increase the size of that. They limited the grant, then they abolished the grant, then it was £1,000 £1,000 tuition fees, then 3,000, then 9,000. Slippery slope. Are we really naive enough to think that the same salami tactics won't occur with assisted dying? And I mean, it's the same with income tax, right? Taxes never, people just didn't used to have an income tax. And then income tax was brought on just for a small number of people, very rich people. And now everyone's paying like 30% of their wages at minimum to the state. Because once a line has been crossed, well, now the question is just how far across that line we're going to go. And yeah, okay, I mean, it's £1,000 in tuition fees. It's not too bad. You're not going to complain about that. Well, 3,000. What are you going to do? Not go to university. 9,000. You got no choice. He is right. Once these things are normalised and are put across, well, it just keeps going, and there's no incentive for the state not to do that either. And they're going to look again. They're definitely going to look at the black hole that is the NHS and say, well, look, if we can reduce the number of people who need to use the NHS, then the NHS can be saved. The NHS will not collapse under the financial burden under which it's placed, and therefore maybe we should use the nudge unit in order to put a bunch of adverts around to encourage people to just get on with it. Because let's be fair, they're a burden on the NHS, they're a burden on everyone else, which is, in fact, what a bunch of people have suggested. Kim Leadbeater here, suggesting that, well, fear of being a burden is a legitimate reason for dying, and so if you're old and you're worried that you're going to be a burden on other people, either your family or the NHS or whatever, then yeah, a large number of old people are like, yeah, screw it, I'm like 75, I'm not dying, but I don't want to be a burden. And well-meaning people might well then kill themselves, which I don't think is a great idea. It's very much like the sort of Midsummer movie, isn't it? When they get to like 71 or something, they commit suicide. Well, it's kind of what we may end up imposing. And she's right. Parliament has not grasped the subtleties of societal coercion. No, I agree. I think that's an entirely fair concern. And as people are pointing out, the safeguards are weak and the risk for abuse is real. Yeah, we could end up like Canada or the Netherlands with this, which is quite horrific, and I really don't like it. I'm not a fan of this. But anyway, you've got Danny Kruger here saying, look, the medics I met in Canada who personally kill hundreds of patients a year. That's awful, isn't it? That's awful.
These medics I met in Canada, specialists in assisted death, who personally kill hundreds of patients a year in their special clinics. And if honourable members have a difficulty with the language, then I wonder what they're doing here. This is what we are talking about.
This is what we're talking about. I mean, I would be naturally suspicious of anyone who wanted to be the sort of person who specialised in euthanizing people. Why are you doing this? Like, you've arrived at the kind of Harold Shipman position, but you're making it something legal and paid. Like, your job is to be a professional euthanist. So, okay, is that what we want the British state to be? Is that where we want our country to go? Again, down the Dutch or the Canadian example of just, the state will just kill you. It's totally normal. It's totally fine. There'll be adverts on the subway. Just be like, if you don't want your family to see you suffer, you can just pop your clogs, get in the suicide pod, and the job's done. It's totally fine. It's totally normal. You don't want to be a burden on the NHS, do you? Go out and bang your pots for the NHS. Our lives, literally, for the NH bloody-S. And again, you realise that, okay, the structures in this country are completely reversed. We are turning into a modern version of Prussia, an army that possesses a state. Well, for us, it's a healthcare system that possesses a country. We are here to support the NHS. The NHS isn't here to support us. No, we ought to do what we can for the NHS to preserve it into the future. The NHS has become our god, and we have to sacrifice for it. So anyway, Nigel Farage said, voted against, not out of a lack of compassion, because I fear the law widen in scope. If it happens, the right to die may become the obligation to die, which I think is a genuinely prescient concern. There really does seem to be something to this, and honestly, who wants to be a part of that? Who wants to be party to it? And, okay, well, it's passed, it's going to go through the Lords, and then it'll eventually be signed into law, unless the King intervenes and says, no, I'm not signing this, which would be The first thing that a monarch has done in probably like 100 years and would be good. So don't expect that from Charles. He had Rachel Maskell here. My constituent was just 46 when she received a terminal diagnosis. She would qualify for an assisted death. She's now 54 and in remission. I'm pleased that this bill doesn't pass. Again, people operate based on what they know. And if the doctor says, well, this is terminal, you're going to die, you've got 4 years or something like that, well, you might be like, okay, and 2 years of those are going to be extreme suffering. After 2 years, you might be like, yeah, I'm just going to kill myself. And I don't want to get into the extreme suffering part. But, of course, 9 years later, actually, she's beating the cancer. It wasn't as terminal as the doctors thought, because, believe it or not, doctors are actually not wizards. They're actually human beings who make mistakes and make bad predictions like everyone else. And this constituent discovered that, actually. And so how many people who were actually going to survive whatever illness they had will be euthanized because the doctors, again, with every incentive in the world to just get rid of those people, will just say, yeah, no, I mean, we'll just put you through, we'll inject you and you won't have to worry about it. I then won't have to worry about it. You'll be off the balance books. That's another person off the NHS waiting list, basically. And I hate to be callous about it, but that's literally what's going to happen. And we know because that's literally what happens in Canada. That's literally how it works. So just terrible. Absolutely terrible. I hate everything about this. So Jeremy Corbyn put out a statement about this, and this is why he's not doing it. He says, I understand why people feel so passionately about their right to die when suffering from a terminal illness. Under the existing system, people endure real, lasting, unbearable pain. That includes those who are seriously or terminally ill as well as those around them. No one should face indignity and death. Any legislation of this kind must robustly safeguard against abuse and guarantee that those who are seriously ill will not be coerced or pressured to prematurely end their life. I am not satisfied this legislation provides these safeguards, and that's why I cannot support it. How is it that I'm completely in agreement with Jeremy Corbyn on anything? Like, I don't agree with Jeremy Corbyn about almost anything else, but this is a completely sane and salient objection to this. Choice at the end of life can only be meaningful in a system where everyone has access to the best palliative care available. But chronic underfunding has left many of those suffering from terminal illness without the support they need. Without addressing these deficiencies, this legislation puts the poorest, elderly and disabled at risk of serious neglect and discrimination. We urgently need to address the appalling state of palliative care by reversing years of austerity and privatisation. Right. So, yes, he is correct. He is correct that this is going to be used coercively to basically clean up the NHS, which is what he's saying. And that is just, based Corbyn for 5 minutes, which he was based on the EU, I suppose, as well. But you know what? It was actually David Lammy. In fact, let me see if I can get Diane Abbott. She's got to have tweeted out something. I mean, she's got a fairly good post here, actually. If the bill does pass, we will soon have a national suicide service fully funded by the NHS, while palliative care is 30% funded at best. Good point, Diane. It's a great point. I don't think we should have a national suicide service funded by the NHS. And you are right, I would like the NHS to be properly funded. That's not going to work while we have open borders, but of course I don't want to get into a different discussion. But honestly, I found the best take to come from David Lammy, which is a weird thing to say in the year of our Lord 2024, right? So he says, this is an important moment. Few votes in my 24 years as a Member of Parliament have felt as significant as or had such wide-ranging and deeply personal consequences for us. Interest both nationally and in Tottenham has been intense, and given this, I want to write to you and why I'm going to vote against this change to the law. Like so many of us, when I think of end of life, it makes me think of my mother. Like millions of working class people, her final diagnosis filled her not with a fear of death, but a fear of being a burden to her family. That is a financial burden on her, then struggling family. Mum, in her final months, treasured every moment she spent with us. But I worry sadly that if she had the option of assisted dying, she would have felt pressure to take it. Very sensitive and morally appropriate assessment from David Lammy, of all people. When a soul's moment of departure becomes an option, something to be scheduled, so does the financial expense of keeping oneself on the earth. The calculations are unavoidable. Am I lingering in this nursing home too long? Are my carers costing too much? As it stands, the law protects people from these questions. I remain deeply worried that as a consequence of this bill, large numbers of people from all backgrounds, but particularly working people, will feel this pressure. As a Christian, I believe this risks violating something profound about the contract between the state and its citizens, which is the sanctity of life. I do not believe the bill on assisted dying removes this threat. Studying closely what has happened in Canada, numerous cases give me cause for concern. I believe profoundly that politics should be about choosing extending life, not shortening it. This is our duty as Member of Parliament, to protect sacred, precious flame of life. As a Christian, this is the rock of my faith. I know after conversations I had with the followers of many other religions, this is a widely shared feeling among diverse faith communities. Blah, blah, blah. What a surprisingly touching and well thought out response from David Lammy. Again, just that is, I completely agree. There are going to, you are right, the calculations are there, and often people of, again, boomers, you say what you like about them, but many of them are actually, at least in Britain, many of them are actually quite conscious of the burden they place on others. Like, I never thought I would be in the same boat as David Lammy on any particular subject, but here we are. Yeah, no, I think David Lammy's right. And I think he's correct in the moral sense, not just for practical reasons, as Jeremy Corbyn gave us. Well, you know, it's not, the NHS deserves proper funding is basically what he's saying. Then he would agree with it. But David Lammy doesn't agree with it, because the weight of it will bear on those people who need it, who need to use the end of life care, the palliative care. And it will just encourage them to kill themselves months before they are due to actually die, months before they actually depart, and deprive those people and their families of those treasured final moments that they spend together. And that's a really great point. And despite the fact that I do think there are very good arguments, like I said, I watched my own grandmother wither away from cancer in extreme amounts of pain, and my God, was that difficult to watch. I only visited her a couple of times, and both times she was completely out of it, completely out, you know, on whatever drugs, and so she finally died, mercifully. And so I'm inclined towards saying, well, yes, but contextually I'm inclined to say no, because obviously it's bad. But also, morally, I think David Lammy has made a great point here. And so I just found this whole episode very, very interesting and very moving and strange. Again, the bedfellows that we find ourselves with, where Nigel Farage, Jeremy Corbyn, David Lammy, and Diane Abbott are all basically like, no, this is immoral. It's very interesting. Whereas a bunch of equally left-wing people are like, yeah, no, we should be able to just kill ourselves, and we should have adverts on the subway saying, yeah, no, it's great, you should definitely kill yourself. You don't want to be a burden. You know, you don't want to be a burden on other people, do you? No, of course not. And then, so we're going to get suicide pods, probably. Again, this will go through the Lords. I don't know what will happen. I imagine that it will end up passing, and I'm not really very in favour of that. I'm not looking forward to it. But, you know, I would have to be in an extreme amount of pain to take that option myself. Personally, I don't think people should kill themselves. But anyway, so I guess I'll leave that there, because I do have to go to bed. It's very late. But yeah, just very interesting times in British politics at the moment. Strange things are happening, and this was just one of them. Like I said, I don't like where this is taking us. Where this is taking us as a country, I don't like what the British state is turning into at all under Starmer. Again, this was his extreme left-wing isms that he just had no choice. He was like, oh no, we have to do this. Why? Because Canada is doing this? Because the Netherlands is doing this. This is just an extreme liberal position that Keir Starmer has been forced to bring forth because he is an ideological midwit and doesn't understand that there are actually reasons not to do this. Again, as Canada is showing us, be careful what you're wishing for, because you just might get it, and then the state might become like the fourth largest leading cause of death in your country, which, again, is a position I just don't want to get to. And this happens when you have only one kind of moral system, by the way. The Canadians don't seem to have any other kind of moral system. They're just liberals. And so, yeah, well, I mean, of course, we'll maintain our National Health Service and we'll give people the right to choose, nudge, nudge, to fucking off themselves. Don't like it. Anyway, thanks for joining me, folks. I'll see you